great week. Beautiful weather this morning, and we get to remember. If you want to go to the next slide, we have an opportunity to congratulate our kids, but next slide as well. It's our time to remember, and I want to take a few moments to say thank you to those here who have served. If you served, if you just raise your hand, whether in the military, I know we have several veterans here. Thank you so much for what you've done. I also know that we have several families here that have members or their children serve in the military. Can you guys raise your hands if you had somebody serve in the military? I've had several nephews. One of my nephews right now is serving, and he was on TV. We didn't realize, actually. He was deployed in Washington around the time of the presidential election, and we saw him on TV. He was laying down with his legs crossed, and we're like, that's Nathan. And so he screenshot it, and there he was. And so I have a nephew serving right now, several other nephews that have served in the military. So I know that it's stressful on you as well as on the families. When they're gone and deployed, it's very difficult. So I want to say thank you to your families for the love and support you give to them. This time of year, I think about one individual. If you go to the next slide. His name was Mark Graham. You probably don't know him. He went to high school with me. That's him running in high school for us. He was an incredible athlete. He ran in the 1992 Barcelona Olympics for Canada. They didn't make the finals, but that just shows you the athlete that he was. He went and he ran for Nebraska and also Kent State University. After that, he came back home and he enlisted into the military, and that's a picture of him in the military. And when I was looking some pictures up on him, I didn't realize a video came up with him in it, and it was one of those promotions to why you should join the Canadian. We have a military. Did you know that? We have a military. There's soldiers and everything. We have tanks. Well, we don't have tanks, but we have a military. But they were promoting, come and be part of our military, and he was in the video. And what he talked about in the video was, I love this atmosphere. We're a family. We're a cohesion unit, and you get to meet people, and you grow closer to one another because you have to rely on one another. And that was his part of the video. I didn't really know him. Mark was a little bit older than I was. I worked out a few times in the weight room around him, and he spotted me and laughed at me. I spotted him, and I don't know why I was spotting him. I don't think I even could have helped him if he got in trouble. It was so heavy. But Mark died when he was deployed, and not by enemy fire, but friendly fire. And so our hearts really went out to him, knowing him and knowing the kind of character of a man that he was. And I think about Mark these days. Right around this time, somebody who gave his life for our country. And there's actually a park now named after him in Hamilton. He was a good man. And it takes me a moment, and it takes me back to when I remember his smiling face. I remember his good attitude. And it just reminds me of people who sacrificed their lives or their time and their effort going into the military, or lost their life when they served. And it's all because they wanted to give us the freedoms that we have in our country. And far too often, we take totally for granted. And this time of year helps us to remember, hey, what we have, the freedom that we have, thus the sermon that we talked about last week, even the freedom we have in God. Remember, we talked about that when we make our decisions. We take that freedom away from God. It becomes us, and we realize this is not where we want to be. We want to be in the freedom and the arms of God. And we take it for granted far too often. And so we have a few moments today to think of those freedoms that we have in God. If you go to the next slide, I want to look at two different people in the book of Judges. I know last week that I said that we're going to leave Judges just for one Sunday. I lied. I apologize. I want to look at Judges just very quickly. If you have your Bibles, we'll go to Judges chapter 4, but I want to read this quote first, please. And it says, and this is what it says. A battle lost or won is easily described, understood, and appreciated. So we can go back in our history. We can look at the battles and the things that have happened in our past history, and we can understand it. We can break it down. We can look at it and appreciate it. But the moral growth, this is what I like, but the moral growth of a great nation requires reflection as well as observation to appreciate it. It's not just looking at history and understanding history, which I love to do. I love looking back at history. But we have to understand what has happened in our history. We have to understand and observe it and bring it into our hearts so we can get the freedoms of what those people did for us. And I want to look at Deborah today, and I want to look at Gideon. So in Judges chapter 4, what it says here about Deborah. She's an incredible woman of God. So Judges chapter 4, starting in verse 4, it says this: Now Deborah was a prophetess, the wife of that guy, and judging Israel at that time. So she was not just a prophetess, she was also one of the judges of Israel. So as a prophetess, she spoke on God's behalf to the people. So God would use her as a spokesman. Not only that, she also judged Israel. I want to drop down to verse 9. And she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, the road on which we are going will not lead you to glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Then Deborah rose and went with Barak. I want you to understand what's going on in this passage of Scripture. What's going on is very simple. God came to Deborah, a prophetess, and she said, you need to get the army ready to go. So she goes to the general and says, get the army ready to go. We're going up against the Canaanites, who for 20 years have oppressed us. The Canaanites had these 900 iron chariots. So they opposed their will on the Israelites on sheer force. You couldn't go up against them. Israel had nothing that could go up against these chariots. So they were at the will of the Canaanites. But God says, no more. We're going to rise up and we're going to push them out. And we're going to come back into a relationship. Again, of course, the people at this time have left their relationship with God. And so she goes, we need to go. And you know what he says to her? I don't go unless you go with us. And that's why he says in this verse that the Lord will give this over to a woman. Now, we can look at Deborah taking some of the glory, because at this time, women did not go lead an army into battle. That was their culture. That was their society. This did not happen. But these men would not go to war without her. We need you to come with us if we're going to win, because we know God is with you. Therefore, you with us, we're going to win. But later on in the story, if you know it, is going to be a woman who kills this general Sisera with a tent peg. I'm not going to go into that, and that's how she gets delivered into the hand of a woman. But she was not a general. She was not designed for this. She wasn't supposed to lead the men like this. But God said, this is where I'm going to need you. There's going to be moments in our lives that we have to remember that God's going to put us into situations that we're not designed for. We weren't prepared for. We thought, this is what I do. This is what I do well. And when God comes knocking on the door and says, no, we need to go to battle, are you going to stand up and go with him? And so I want you to take a moment to look at Deborah, who stood up for God's people so they could have freedom once again from the Canaanites. But she had to step out of her comfort zone of what she wanted or what she thought she needed to do. I want to look at one other judge this morning, in just a few pages over in chapter 6. It is Gideon. Gideon is one of those men that I really relate to extremely well. He was a man who lived in fear. At this time, the Midianites have now come in and taken over Israel, that area, oppressing the people. They're a very strong force. And he's living in fear. When God comes to him, he's threshing his wheat in the middle of the night on a wine press. Because if the Midianites knew that he was doing this, they would take everything that he had, all his wheat, they would take for themselves and for their army. And so he's doing this in the middle of the night to take care of himself. But then God shows up, and listen to what he says in Judges, the 6th chapter, and starting in verse 12. He says, and the angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, the Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor. O mighty man of valor? He's not a mighty man. He's not a man of valor who's going to go out and take on the world because he has this honor and this courage. He's in the middle of the night. He's in fear of the Midianites, and he's threshing wheat. He's just a farmer. And God says, no, you're not. You don't have to live in fear. I'm with you, and I will make you a man of valor. And so what happens here? And you may know the story of the 300 men that go into battle. We'll talk about it in a moment. But God doesn't make him a general right away. He goes, this is what I need you to do first. I need you to get up in the middle of the night because you're so fearful. We're not going to do this in the daylight. But in the middle of the night, go to the high place and break down the altar of Baal. And the Asheroth pole, I want you to break it and put it to the side. Okay, I can do that at night because nobody's going to see me. That's how we like to work right now. So he goes, he breaks down the altar of Baal, breaks the pole. Everybody gets up in the morning and goes, what happened? And who did this? And all the fingers point to Gideon. And that's why the army assembles. All the Midianites and everybody comes and they're going to assemble because no one stands up against us. And we'll take care of this problem once and for all. I want to see another quote. We're going to use quotes all the way through. Listen to this quote about courage. Next slide. We'll do this first. That's fine. That's fine. We'll look at verse 15 and 16. And then we'll come back to that quote in just a moment. 15 and 16. And he said to them, please, Lord, how can I save Israel? Again, this goes back to who he is, a man of fear. He goes, I can't do this. Behold, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I'm the least in my father's house. That means he's not even the oldest. He's not going to lead his house. He's just a brother of that house, a member of that house. He goes, how? And the Lord said to him, but I will be with you, and I shall strike the Midianites as one man. He goes, look at me. I am a nobody. I am an absolute nobody. What can I do? My tribe in Manasseh is the least. I am nobody. And he says, we're going to be with you. When you look at the next one, and it's going to be I believe it's verse 34. I want you to see the Spirit of the Lord clothed Gideon. So God says, I'm going to be with you. I'm not just going to be beside you. I'm not going to be behind you. I'm going to clothe you. And together we're going to take on this task. Now look at this quote right here about courage. You will never do anything in this world without courage. You will do nothing in this world without courage. It is the greatest quality of the mind next to honor. That's by Aristotle. If we do not have the courage to step up and go, you never will. Look at the next quote I want to look at with you. Courage is almost a contradiction in terms. I love this. Courage is almost a contradiction in terms. What do you mean? It means a strong desire to live taking the form of readiness to die. That means when you take that step, when Gideon says, okay, I'm going to go to war against extremely powerful people, and I might die, and I'm ready to die. That's courage. And that's what he's going to show, but that's what God does for him. Within the story, what we find here is that he doesn't have all the courage in the world. He actually tests God with the fleece. You remember that? Testing God with the fleece. He says, I want all the ground to be wet and the fleece dry. God does it. He goes, okay, if you're really with me, I want you to do the opposite. I want the fleece to be wet and the ground dry in the morning. So there's no dew, just wet fleece. And that happens. And so he goes, okay, I know that he's going to be with me. And there's still a little trust problem here. The Midianites has formed. I want you to look at Judges chapter 7 and verse 12 and look at what he says here. Judges chapter 7, verse 12. And the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the people of the east lay along the valley like locusts in abundance. I mean, that means they covered the valley. This is a huge army. And their camels were without number in the sand that is on the seashore in abundance. There's no way we can win. But he's going to go down into the camp. He's going to listen to some of these guys, and they're going to say, man, we can't win. We're going to lose this battle. So he even has that more trust. And so he gathers his army, and you know what happens? God says, too much, too many, and he cuts the army. And he still has this army. Too many, cut them more, cut them more, cut them more. Yell out the number he goes to war with. 300 against that. You know what's even crazier? They never draw their weapon. They go to war with trumpets and torches. And win. When we are overcome with fear, let's go back and remember Gideon. And when we say, I'm not worthy, I'm not strong enough, I'm not big enough, I'm just this person, I'll do everything in the dark, I'll keep quiet, I'll sit in my little spot. And when God comes calling on you and saying, step up, have the courage to take the step, die for me, then do it. And stand for the truth. And go to battle for God. This is what I want you to do today. I want you to be a hero. That is the call today. I want us to be a hero. Today we remember our heroes of the past. I'm calling you to be the Christians today and to be the heroes of today. Look at this next quote. Bob Dylan. I don't know, but he says something good. A hero is someone who understands the responsibility that comes with his freedom. You have been given the gift of freedom. We talked about all that last week. Freedom in God. There are boundaries in that, but we talked about that last week. But there's responsibility given to you within that freedom, and that is being a hero and stepping up for God. Look at the next quote I want you to look at. This is Arthur Ashe. I don't have time to explain who that is. True heroism is remarkably sober, very undramatic. It is not the urge to surpass all others at whatever cost, but the urge to serve others at whatever cost. Well, it's not about me being a hero. It's not me being better than you. A hero is someone who steps out, who steps up, not for themselves, but for the people around them. It's not about us. It's about the people around us. It's about the next generation who's going to know who Jesus Christ is. When you look at Deborah, when you look at Gideon and other men and women of God in the Bible, they understood who they were fighting for. Number one, they were fighting for their people, for God's people. They were fighting for God. Why? Because they knew and understood they have to have a relationship with God. They have to have that relationship with God. And so that's why we need to step up. I love what Norman Schwarzkopf says on this. It doesn't take a hero in order to order men into battle. It takes a hero to be one of those to go into battle. See, a hero is not the one that says, you go. The hero says, we go. And we go into battle together. Probably one of the greatest generals that we had in our time, who stood up and says, a hero is the person who goes into that battle. Gideon, Deborah, many others understood that. They fought for their people. They fought for God because they understood that relationship with God is most important. But we'll look at these passages. We'll look at Paul. We'll look at Peter and say, that's just not me. That's just, it's not me. You're asking me to do something that it's not me. I want you to listen to a woman called Mary Roach. Heroism does not always happen a burst of glory. Sometimes small triumphs and large hearts change the course of history. You're not going to go into the battle. You're not going to go into this huge battle and probably win a great victory. There's not going to be trumpets blowing when you come home and things are going to happen. Sometimes it's just the little things that we do, the impacts that we have around us that can change the history, in the course of history, not just for us, but the people around us. So many people come to me and say, John, I'm just not that person. I can't do that. I'm not a leader. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a teacher. But you can make an influence on those in your circle, as they call it, of influence. Now, you might not change the United States of America, but you might change somebody in your office that they can come to know who Jesus is. You might have an influence on the children you're teaching in that school because of the influence that you have with them. You have a circle of influence, and make it count. It's going to be those little triumphs in life that's going to matter the most. I remember one story. I love World War II history, as Sally knows that. I'll be in the room. I'll just be watching another history program about World War II, and Sally's like, don't you know this? I'm like, yeah, but I want to learn more. There was one story about this one gun turret that the Germans had. They could not get around it. They kept on attacking it. It was on a hill. Several different countries tried to attack it. I know the Americans tried to do it, the British. Got a lot of Canadian stories today. Hey, so the Canadians, it was their turn to try to take the hill. Well, they went up against this hill, against this gun turret, and they were pretty much doing the same thing everybody else was doing, failing. This one guy was sitting there, and he looks around, and he sees the bullets are flying around him. They're going after his buddies. several of his crew, his platoon, were killed, and he knew one thing he had to do. I got to get up and I got to run at the turret. He gets up, he starts running. He had a couple grenades on him. He runs up the hill, and he keeps on running, keeps on running, keeps on running. A few times a bullet might graze him, or explosion over here, he'd fall down, but he got back up and he kept on running, kept on running. Finally got up to that turret. He got his grenades in there, and they were able to take the hill. They were interviewing him in one of these specials, and they go, "Why did you run up the hill? Why did you do this? No one in their right mind would run up a hill at a machine gun. Why would you do this?" He goes, "Because I looked around and I saw my friends, my brothers, dying. And if I didn't get up, who was going to? If I didn't get up and run, they were going to die." He goes, "I don't know what I was doing. I just knew I needed to do one thing, and that was to run." He wasn't qualified to run up the hill. He wasn't designated to run up the hill. He wasn't the best shot. He couldn't throw the grenade the longest. He just knew he had to get up and run. And he had to fight for those around him. Far too often, we say, "I can't." When you say the words, "I can't," you will never do anything. You won't. And then we gripe and complain about what's not getting done. Run up the hill. Fight. Because it's so important about the relationships that we have with one another, most of all, our relationship with God. I want us to take the time, and we're going to in just a few moments, our time of a memorial when we can remember Christ. The judges stood up and led the people of Israel because of their relationship with God, and they wanted them to have that relationship with God. And we have a memorial today. We remember every single Sunday about Jesus Christ and his greatest sacrifice that he has made for us. And because of that sacrifice, through him, we have a relationship with God. But if you ever notice, and we studied the book of Acts in our Bible class, but when you read through the Bible, when anybody talks about God, or they're talking to somebody about God, where do they always start? Remember. Remember. Remember, he brought us out of Egypt. Remember, he brought us to the promised land. Remember the promise he gave to Isaac, Abraham, and Jacob. Remember, remember, remember. And so today we remember, and we need to take that time to remember what God has done through us, through his son, that love that he's given us, to spur us on to become heroes for him with the people around us. 2 quotes, and then the lesson will be yours. Ronald Reagan. "Freedom is never more than one generation away from extinction. We did not pass it to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. Or one day, we will spend our sunset years telling our children and our children's children what it once was like in the United States when men were free." One generation. That's all it takes. So I'm going to leave these words with you from another president, JFK, and you know it very well, where he says, I don't know where we're at, there we go. "My fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Probably a pretty good quote, isn't it? Stop asking what everybody can do for you. What can you do for others? How do you serve others? It's absolutely incredible. When we studied last week, what I noticed through my study is freedom is never for me. Freedom in God was never for me. Because when people ask Jesus, what's the most important thing I have to do? Love God and what? Love others. That's freedom. And that's what we need to fight for and teach. Brothers and sisters in Christ, be heroes today. Step up and be heroes. Run up the hill and fight. If not for yourself, for the people around you, for the next generation. Because I don't want them to remember what it once was like. I want them to think about what it will be like in their life. This morning, if we can encourage you, pray for you, lift you up in any way, we always have this moment for that, so where we, as a family, can love on one another. I know that I'm not always a hero. I know that I've allowed myself to just kind of drift away from God and become very comfortable in my relationship, and I just kind of dwell there. And sometimes I need that urging to come back and really put my fight back where it needs to be. So this morning, if we can help or encourage you in that way, please come as we stand and sing.